Hi, this is Brian Russell. Welcome back to class. I want to go over with you your grammar and syntax work from Psalm 19, verses 4 to 5 in the Hebrew, and that's English, verses 3 and 4. I would invite you to go ahead and pause the video and make sure you have access to Arnold Choi, the Hebrew text, and your own homework so we can carefully walk through this. And as you go over your own homework, make sure that you have the various pieces that I'm describing. So let's go ahead and look at the Hebrew text. All right, verse 4 opens up with two essentially verbless clauses. These are this particle here, ain, is sometimes called the particle of non-existent. It essentially means there is no or there are no. It depends on the word that goes with it. And then in each case, in this we have a word that means speech. And then in the second usage, we have a word that you probably recognized, a masculine plural absolute form of devarim, words. So this is literally, there is no speech, there are no words. And you would analyze both of these nouns. These are nominatives, so you'd be in 2.1, and this would be 2.1.2, and these would both be examples of predicate nominatives. Now, the last clause that we have in verse 4 begins with a particle that you don't see very often in Hebrew, beli, and this is another particle that means essentially no. Now, what you want to do, this is a place where you'll see English translations differ because this gets down to a interpretive crux issue that you face when you're working with Psalm 19, and the question is, the psalm starts off, the heavens declare, but then verse 3 perhaps seems to indicate that though the heavens are declaring, they're not doing anything with words. And so as you can see, even in the two examples that we have, there is no speech nor are there words, whose voice is not heard, is completely different from there is no speech nor are there words, their voice is not heard. So NRSV is essentially denying that there's any kind of understandable speech. ESV is affirming that there is no speech or words that isn't heard. So you can look at my notes on 19 to see some of the technical pieces. In some level, this isn't really even a Hebrew question. It has to do with how to deal with some ambiguity, because the easiest way to understand this particle here is a particle of non-existence. Now, what do we have after that? Well, the rest of it, we have nishma, which we have a participle. This would be a nifal participle, masculine singular, from Shema. You should be able to pick that up, at least the root. That means here, and its subject follows it. We have voice with a third masculine plural suffix on it, so their voice. And if this is a participle, you can let's look up the participles. Well, first of all, the kol, might as well do the noun. This would be essentially a subject, in the sense that it's using the participle as an actual verb. In Hebrew, participles put the stress on ongoing action. And so this functions as essentially a verb here. And you're going to want to go to section 3 in Arnold Choi, and we can find the participle in 3.4.3. And this is an example of a predicate participle. Predicate participles function almost like a verb in a clause that doesn't have a regular finite verb. So their voice is not being heard in this case. And this would be an example based on the context. Again, if we take there is no and there are no at the beginning of verse 4, this would make sense that this is a present predicate participle here. So this would be, and then the nifal, it would be, if we look up nifal, the stem, the nifal stem can be used for passive voice or also middle reflexive voice. And in this case, most likely, this would be passive. Their voice is not being heard. Okay, that was verse 4. So hopefully you did well. Again, if you have questions, post those. Let's go on to verse 5. And verse 5 presents us with some slightly different questions. We have verse 5 opens up with a what? A prepositional phrase, v'kol haaretz, in all of the earth. Now, we can start with the preposition. It has a noun phrase as its object, all the earth. But let's first take the force of the entire prepositional phrase. This would be a bait. And what kind of bait would this be? Again, make sure you go to Arnold Choi 4.1.5. And this would be a spatial use of the bait. So this would be a spatial prepositional phrase. Now what we also have, we have a kol haaretz. This is in construct, so we have a genitive. So we have to ask ourselves, what kind of genitive is in this noun phrase, all of the earth? And so let's go back to our noun section and have a look at the genitive. And take a look at your own work, and what did you argue that this was an example of? When we're talking about all of something, that's going to be an example of measure. All measure of what? The genitive marks the thing measured, so this would be 2.2.11. Genitive measure. Now our next word is a verb. Yatsa, this is third masculine singular, call perfect. So the call here is clearly a fiative. This is talking about going out. The subject follows this, so this would be a nominative here. Their voice goes out or went out. So all we have to do then is talk about the perfect in this case. So what is the force of the perfect? Well, again, 3.2.1, and this would be an example of essentially completed action, but in this case, it's completed action in the present. Their voice goes out. All right, so we'll go with that, and then the second part of verse 5 starts with another. You notice kind of the parallel structure here. We start talking about another prepositional phrase and bait in end of the world, tevel, and we would probably there notice we might expect to have a definite article. So literally, this isn't a definite construct change, but easiest to say to end of world. This would be again a particle bait that is probably spatial, because it's the picture of to the end of the world. And here we have repeated parallel. There's no verb in the second one, but we have another noun. This is a plural noun, feminine plural noun that has the third masculine plural suffix on it. So this is their words. So in other words, the first part of this goes, in all the earth, their voice goes out, and in or to the end of the earth, their words, again supplied, goes out. So this would be a nominative subject in this case, which then brings us to the last bit of the last line of verse 5. It starts off with la shemesh. This is to the sun, for the sun. We'll come back to that in a second. Well, let's just go ahead and look at it. For the sun. This is prepositional phrase. This is an easy one, preposition lamed. So let's go back to the end. And if you look at the entire translation, this is going to be talking about he established a tent in them, talking about the ends of the earth and the world and all the worlds for the sun. Okay, so this last phrase in verse 6 goes and makes a sun metaphor. So he established a tent in them, or in them the heavens, in them the edge of the earth for the sun. And so what would be the force of the Lamed here? Let's start with this. Then we'll come back to the rest of it. We're just trying to get a fundamental translation to get started here. This could be, for the Lamed, it's probably not spatial here because this is on behalf of something. It's not locative, it's not temporal, it's not purpose. But it's related probably to this quasi-datival, probably interest, advantage, for the advantage of the sun. He established a tent for the sun, for the use of the sun, for the advantage of the sun. So this would be a dative, this would be the Lamed of interest advantage, which would again be 4.1.10 E1. Okay. Sham, this is a third masculine singular call perfect from seem. This is from a middle weak verb, seen, yod, mem. As a call, this is clearly fientive. And then what's the force of the perfect? This would be another completed action. He established. And in this case, tent would be the object. He set a tent in for the sun. And then we have bait him in them. Again, a little ambiguous here what the them is referring to. You can see some of the translations are trying to identify that with the heavens that get mentioned in a bit in the next couple of verses. Or this could be looking backwards, but this would be a spatial use of bait with, in this prepositional phrase, them. So again, that was the grammar. Go back. If you miss anything, just listen to this slowly. Stop the video as needed. If you get stuck on any of my explanations, ask. Again, make sure that you're using Arnold Choi, and a couple of the things. For verbs, make sure you're talking about the Benyon and the actual verb type. You want to have two labels for your verbs. I'm Brian Russell. I'm grateful for the chance to be your professor, and I will see you soon.